Good morning. This is Paul Sandeman with Business Success Tips, where you learn to make more money in less time and have more fun, especially more fun. I have Belinda Jackson with me today from Prosell International. And so, Belinda, tell me what you do and how you do it.
So we are specialists at improving businesses' profitability by going into the business, looking at what their opportunities are, and improving those gaps that we see essentially. So that could be systems and processes, could be customer service, could be sales opportunities, but that's our key specialty. So yeah, is that a good enough answer?
That's it. Now, you're obviously not a native U.S. person because you have this really neat accent. So, where do you live and where are you originally from?
So I live in New York City. I'm originally from Australia, hence the bad accent. I've lived here for almost 20 years, and I still struggle to pronounce my husband's name, and his name's Peter. I drop the R's at the end.
I think it's I like the accent. It's very cool. So why should people hire you as opposed? There's a lot. I mean, a lot of coaches. And what makes you special? Why would somebody hire you versus all the other coaches out there?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to quality of delivery and the results that we achieve. People get reduced staff turnover, happier teams, more effective teams, significantly improved in efficiencies and effectiveness with their customers, and increased sales results and increased profitability, because we might see opportunities around waste or how they can be more efficient with something. So it might not actually be about increasing the cost of something rather than reducing their expenses. So there's some of the things that we do, but it's just the quality of our delivery.
Then, well, what makes you different from, there's a lot of coaching. What do you think is your unique selling proposition? Which makes you special?
Yeah, understanding the customer's problem. I think we go in and we have a 4-step process. We do a diagnosis to start with, and that's where I sit down and just really dig into the business. What are all the challenges that they're being faced with? What's happening with their teams? What's happening with their customers? What do their customers think about them? Are they getting referrals from their customers? Are customers coming back for repeat work or delivery? And if their customers are going elsewhere, why are they choosing other organizations? So we really will go and understand that. We'll interview customers, we interview their teams, we interview the business owners, we dig into all the numbers. And so that once we've really understood that, then we come up with a program around fixing all those gaps and developing the tools, the training, all the manuals associated, and that then we deliver all of that training and build out with the business leaders, the business owners, and their teams. And then we leave them with all of the tools to continue on with that, because from a learning and development perspective, once organizations have worked with, learnt something, if they don't practice those tools and skills within the next 3 months, they will have lost 85% of that knowledge. And so we make sure that it's embedded. We'll work with them for a good 3 to 6 months to make sure it's embedded within the organization. And so that makes us uniquely different to other business coaches.
So why don't you give me one of your biggest successes and biggest failures? We all have them, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our biggest successes is an energy company in the Midwest, and they were selling gas and electricity. And they had high staff turnover. They weren't getting a good close rate on their calls from sales, whether that be in person or on the phone. And we went in and and I actually did write these numbers down, so I can tell you about that. We increased their sales results within 6 months by 30%. We
Wow.
decreased their staff turnover by 10%. And then once we'd done that with their sales team, then they pulled us into their technical team, because as you'd be aware, in organizations like that, they're going out and fixing pipes and
Right.
connections and construction, things like that.
Right.
And we were and so we started working with their tech team, and we increased their customer satisfaction using their net promoter score valuation by 15% within a year. And then we developed their succession planning. So that was all part of it. It ended up being a top-down benefit because they had this better succession planning and skill development, capability, institutional knowledge, but then also the profitability around the increased sales results, reducing the amount of customer loss that they had. It was a very competitive environment in the Midwest.
Mhm.
And so that was a great success story. Yeah. Look, failures. I struggled to think of failures, but I think the biggest failure that I could think of was actually an organization we went into who was a selling a service, an organization selling a service, and I can't name names. And they went through the program, they got initial results, and then they got distracted and didn't follow through. And it ended up that they basically, they got some benefits out of the program, but they went back to their old habits.
Yeah, that
And that was
happens.
that was sad. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm sure you work with some contractors. Most people in this audience are contractors. What do you think is the biggest issue that faces like small construction companies, remodeling companies, general contractors, home builders, that kind of thing? You work with a lot of companies. What do you think is their biggest issue, and how would you deal with it? Just your opinion.
Yeah, look, I have worked with construction companies. I think sometimes the biggest issue is managing the personalities, and especially when you're looking at sort of those small to medium sized enterprises, let's say they've got 10 staff or 50 staff or whatever. It's still a lot of people to manage. And how do they go about doing that? And all too often I've spoken to sort of small construction people who've been sort of a small team of sole operators almost, where they've actually gone out and delivered it themselves, and then they've grown, and they say, the biggest problem I have is my team. It'd work really well if I could have 10 of me working for me.
Right.
And so that's about them really trying to understand what are the team offering? How do I actually tap into these people to help them be successful? And that happens throughout the delivery of the service, the way they sell. They think that they're the only people who can sell their products because that's what they've been successful with.
Mhm.
So it's in that growth phase, from moving to a really small team to building it out, and then suddenly finding that they've got all these problems, and it's how do they manage that?
Well, to me, it's sort of for, the Peter principle, it's sort of like that. People promote to themselves their own level of confidence. Happens a lot in contractors. So they're start off as a carpenter, a plumber, whatever, and they get this company going and they start it. And then down the road, 3 years, and they're making less owning the company than they were making as a plumber, right? So I call that the transition from like craftsman to entrepreneur. Now, you've worked for big corporations, like, big companies and little companies. So I imagine you have experience in helping people make that transition. So how do you coach somebody who's a plumber or electrician or a carpenter into being an entrepreneur and a leader?
So you, just so that I understand the question, so this would be sort of a solopreneur who's actually moving
Well,
from being
they're
a
a
plumber
guy.
or something to
Given
then
the scenario,
having employees. Yeah.
the guy is a carpenter. He decides to go on his own. Now he starts a small remodeling company, and he works with friends and clients, hires his buddies. Now down the road, he's doing about 3 million, got about 5 or 6 people, and he's still a carpenter in his brain. He hasn't become a business owner yet.
Yes.
And he says, if I could just find good people and good clients, this would be easy, but there's no good people out there and there's no good clients and life sucks. So how do you help making that transition from like a carpenter to an entrepreneur, which is an entirely different mindset? And you must have
Yes.
coached people through that. How do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to be aware that we don't have a dramatic mind shift change overnight. So it's about helping them try to really understand the customer. And sometimes your customer is the person who's actually paying you to, let's say, go out and do the plumbing on their house, or put in all the pipes on the new home, or fix the house, or whatever it is from a
Right.
plumbing perspective. So sometimes that's the customer, the person who's writing the checks. But sometimes the customer is actually the plumber who's working for you. So there's a few key things around that from a leadership perspective. Is one, understand both of those customers and look at it from what do they want out of it. So that the customer who's writing the check, they want a good quality service for the right price, for an agreed price. So it's making sure that you actually quote correctly, making sure that you advise the customer around all the risks, if there's any sort of range in the price that you need to offer. So it could be, well, providing that the weather's correct, or what's all the risk mitigation. So maybe you're doing a quote that, this job's going to be between $40,000 and $50,000, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to quote you exactly $40,000, and then find that because of supply chain issues or whatever, the price blows out and you end up then actually not making as much profit as you thought. And then you're trying to actually add that onto the customer. So the customer feels disappointed.
I know, because sometimes the customer, if you say $40,000 and it's 45,000, they're totally pissed off. They go,
Yeah.
you lied, you didn't tell me the truth. And especially sometimes you say it's between 40 and 50, they hear the 40, they don't hear the 50.
Absolutely.
And then they get
Absolutely.
angry at you because it's $45,000, even though you did a great job.
Exactly. And that's where, from a leadership perspective, that solopreneur needs to actually move into the mindset of, what does my customer want? My customer wants constant communication, wants to understand. So you need to actually make sure it's really clear in the quote. So this is the quote, this is how I'm building it out, and this is why I've got this range. So it could be, let's say, for example, supply chain issues. We all know what happened during the pandemic. Supply
Right.
chain became a major issue. So that could be one example. There could be weather issues. There could be other issues, whatever they are. Try to actually put those into the quote so that your customer really understands that you're an expert in your field and you're providing them with a lot of transparency about what they need. And so it all gets down to that. And then sitting down and having the conversation with the customer and asking them questions so that they truly understand what you're offering and why you're providing a superior product to your competitor and a more competitive rate. So then from a leadership perspective, how do you actually inculcate that into your other customers who are your team, who are you actually delivering the product? It's, what do they want? They want to know that they come to work at a specific time, that they get paid well for the work that they're doing, that there's opportunity for them to have interesting projects. And so you engage them by making sure that they're part of that process. You don't just say, go to Mrs. Smith's house and, install pipes from, the curb, to the bathroom. You actually make them understand what Mrs. Smith wants, so that they're part of the solution.
So on my coaching career, I've had a difficult time convincing owners of businesses that their employees were just as important to customers, if not more important customers than their end user, the actual client. How do you do that? Because a lot of these guys that I work with, they go, look at, I'm paying them good money. They should be there on time. And, I've heard the saying, what is it? Something beatings will continue until performance approves, right? I mean, so they don't get this concept of their employee is a customer, right? Probably the most important customer. No employees, no business. How do you get that across to, some, I don't know, plumber, electrician, and whatever, who just says, look, I just do a good job. I pay you good money. Just, I don't need to, your problems aren't my problems. Just do it.
Wow. Yes. Yes. I think sometimes employers see their employees like widgets, or, they wish they could just have a robot do the job because the robot isn't going to be late. I think it's helping the employers understand that these are people, and by maximizing what the employee offers, and this gets back to hiring well, which you're involved in. It's like I always say, take a long time to hire, manage easy, take a short time to hire, manage hard.
Right. That's true.
Because yeah, because I think that's really important. Make sure you've got the right kind of attitude and skill development, but don't be light on your training and development. If someone's actually struggling, whatever, make sure you buddy up with them and find out what's going on. Like, if they're turning up late, is it because they hate the job and they're out looking for other jobs? Is it because you're not paying well enough? Make sure you understand what your competitors are paying, because again, they're your customer. Do they feel good about the product that they're selling? Are you actually using, top quality materials and charging accordingly? Or are you using medium level materials and charging a cheaper rate and putting that into your price quotes, and then being competitive so that they can really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it? Because again, it gets back to transparency with your team.
What does transparency with your team look like, in your opinion?
So I think including them with all the tools and materials, and understanding about what the mission of the task and the business is about. So if you're a solopreneur and you've got, let's say, 5 plumbers working for you, we're sticking with the plumbing example, but it could be carpenters or any other kinds of construction people involved. If you're a solopreneur and you've got 5 people working for you, the goal is about you making money as a business leader, but it's also about them being successful as a plumber so that they can actually provide for themselves and their families. And so it's, what do they need to know? They need to understand the customer. What does the customer want to know? It's about making sure that they have all of that tools, training, understanding of the customer, understanding of the specific job that they're working on, and understanding, most of the pricing levels. Obviously, you don't want to share your complete P&L with them, because that's your business. But I think just making sure that they're included in as much as possible makes them feel part of the business, and giving them promotions and potentially commissions if they do a great job and that's all successful from a time cost perspective. Perhaps they actually get a nice bonus at the end of that job. If the client actually refers them to their friend, perhaps there's a bonus that gets shared around for that referral. I think having
So,
those good incentives really helps.
so when you've worked with companies that have had not bad turnover, they've had those issues of turnover, right? People come and going.
Sure.
How did you resolve those?
Wow. So I think understanding what was the issue. Was it about pay? Was it about lack of transparency? Was it about lack of career path? Was it about lack of tools, lack of understanding what the organization's going like? All too often people are told to just go and do their narrow part of the job, but not understanding the bigger picture. So for instance, if you're a construction person, you might have a plumber and carpenter working for you and explain what the plumber needs to do and give them no perspective about how what they're doing actually fits into the building of the house and how they relate to the carpenter. And that could be very frustrating. So it's truly sometimes, you know, with poor staff turnover, it's actually about doing interviews and understanding why people are leaving. I always recommend doing an exit interview and trying to glean as much information as possible. Some of the other tactics are make sure that, you know, when someone comes on board, you actually do regular check-ins. So, you know, week 1, you might be checking in daily. Week 2, you might check in, the next week for month 1, you might check in weekly. And you might continue checking in weekly for the first 3 months, but make sure that there's a 3-month review, because in 3 months, the individual should have a good feel about what the organization is like. And you want to get a good temperature check about whether or not this has been a good investment. And if you haven't actually recruited properly at this point in time, you should be having a tough conversation with that person and perhaps either asking for them to do something different or potentially letting them go, which is
So
sad,
what does a
but that
check-in
could be
look
good
like?
learning.
You said, what does a check-in look like? You know, check-in weekly, check-in monthly. What does that actually look like with an employee?
Yeah, sitting down, asking, so how are you feeling about working here? What's gone well? Any suggestions on improvements? Tell us about the training. Do you feel like you've got the right tools? Have you engaged with customers yet? Whatever their tasks are involved, what systems and processes do we have? I know a lot of these organizations, sort of communicate, via online tools. So it could be, via text. How are we communicating with you? Is it sufficient? Are you getting enough information? Do you feel like you've got the comfort to actually, call your superiors to say, I'm concerned about this job for whatever reason it is? Could be safety, could be that the customer said something that makes you think, gee, I'm concerned about this customer's satisfaction. What do we need to mitigate that risk?
You've done a lot of employee interviews, I'm sure, in your career, right? What do you think is the biggest complaint employees have about their boss in general?
Not communicating with them. That's the biggest one that I ever hear. I'm like, all too often I hear, I'm a mushroom, kept in the dark of this organization, don't know what's going on, don't know if I'll have a job in 6 months' time, don't know whether or not we're making money on this job.
Okay, so communications, cool.
Yeah.
So, Belinda, if somebody wants to get in touch with you and they sort of like your style, how would they reach you?
Yeah, so my email address is belinda.jackson@prosell.us. And they can call me direct. My number is 646-256-2250. My website is prosellinternational.com.
So what kind of people would you like to have call you that are listening?
Those entrepreneurs who are wanting to actually achieve more sales, achieve a better satisfied team, get more customers, have better testimonials, more referrals, things like that.
Great. Well, thank you, Belinda. I appreciate you being here. And if you're listening to this, I think you should give Belinda a call. I'm assuming your first call is free. They can just call you and have a conversation with you at no charge.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I suggest you give Belinda a call. Thanks, Belinda. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, Paul.